Welcome to the Assessment Accommodations Overview for the IAM assessment. My name is Allison Traficanti, and I am the Accessibility and Accommodations Specialist with IDOE's Office of Student Assessment. This overview will provide helpful information regarding accommodations for the IAM assessment, as well as resources for you to access. Today we will cover new and notable features and accommodations, information about how those accommodations are presented in Indiana IEP, and frequently asked questions about this assessment. Human Reader for all items is now available as a designated feature for any students determined to require it by the Case Conference Committee. Text-to-speech is available universally for all students participating in IAM. If the Case Conference Committee determines a human reader would be best, the human reader function can be chosen from designated features. Text will be read aloud to the student by a human reader using a reader script for the paper fixed form or online platform. This designated feature is only applicable to the alternate assessment IAM. A student who is deaf or hard of hearing may require the use of a sign language interpreter. A student who requires an interpreter to sign content must have the following daily accommodations selected in Indiana IEP. Student provided access to an interpreter for sign language, and test directions and content signed to the student hard of hearing. Students who require test directions and content signed must have the following assessment accommodations indicated within their IEP. Student provided access to a sign language interpreter for all items, including items testing reading comprehension via the online test or paper test. These assessment accommodations are now available in Indiana IEP. To prepare for testing, schools must ensure that accommodations from the student's formal education plan are correctly reflected in Cambium's Testing Information Distribution Engine, otherwise known as TIDE, before testing begins. If the accommodations in TIDE match those in the student's formal plan, the test administrator should approve the student to access the IAM assessment. If the accommodations in TIDE do not match those in the student's formal plan, the test administrator should not approve the student to access the online test. The teacher of record should review information in Indiana IEP, making any necessary updates with parent permission after consulting the Case Conference Committee. The school test coordinator and test administrator should confirm the student's correct settings in TIDE once updates are made, and then administer the test to the student. The alternate assessment participation criteria has not changed for the 2022-2023 school year. Student participation in IAM is a Case Conference Committee decision. If the Case Conference Committee determines that all four participation criteria accurately characterize the student's current educational situation and selects those four criteria in Indiana IEP, the student becomes eligible to participate in the alternate assessment in lieu of the general education assessment. The four criteria are listed on this slide and include the following. Review of student record indicates a disability that significantly impacts intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. Adaptive behavior is defined as essential for someone to live independently and to function safely in daily life. The student requires extensive, repeated, individualized instruction and support that is not of temporary nature. The student uses substantially adapted materials and individualized methods of accessing information in alternative ways to acquire, maintain, generalize, demonstrate, and transfer skills across multiple settings. Goals listed in the IEP for this student are linked to the enrolled grade level alternate achievement standards, otherwise known as Indiana Content Connectors. It is important to note that only 1% of the student population should participate in the alternate assessment. When accommodations are missing or do not match what is included in the IEP, first confirm that the current version of the IEP is finalized. TIDE only pulls information from finalized IEPs and will not from a proposed IEP. To confirm that the IEP containing the most current accommodation plan is finalized, go to the Student History page in Indiana IEP and ensure that the IEP is indicated as dark green, meaning it is finalized, and not indicated as blue, meaning it is still identified as proposed and not accepted. For the current valid IEP, click the Details button. Updating accommodations once testing begins can impact test eligibility, which can result in invalidation of one or more tests. Annual case reviews, ACRs, held during the testing window could jeopardize new accommodations not being entered into the TIDE system. Schools should also ensure that students have opportunities to engage with state assessment accommodations prior to the assessment so that any changes to accommodations are made before the student begins testing. Schools should take into account that a case conference committee meeting is required for a transfer student to occur within 10 instructional days of the enrollment date. This is also true for students who enroll in your school during an active test window. This meeting could also occur prior to the 10th instructional day. Ensuring test participation of any transfer student is also reinforced in the IAM Test Coordinator's Manual, which reminds schools to report newly enrolled students and/or update accommodations as needed and in a timely manner. Most test invalidations reported to IDOE each year are related to accommodations given to or withheld from students in error. The following reminders are based on some of the most common issues reported by schools. Ensure only one active record per student exists in Indiana IEP. Confirm student accommodations are correct in TIDE before testing begins. Administer tests using the correct scripted directions, whether they come from the appropriate test administrator's manual and/or any accommodated read-aloud script. Provide any non-embedded accommodations locally, such as a multiplication table or additional breaks as prescribed by the student's formal plan. Schools should review the 2022-2023 Accessibility and Accommodations Information for statewide assessments and the 2022-2023 Indiana Assessments Policy Manual for additional details and reminders. The 2022-2023 Indiana Assessment Policy Manual outlines flexibility and protocols for students and staff who require the use of electronic devices during testing so they can monitor their glucose levels if needed. More details are discussed in the policy manual. The 2022-2023 Accessibility and Accommodations Information for statewide assessments details specific protocols for test administrators when administering tests to students with a temporary medical condition, such as a broken arm or concussion. Every fall, Cambium publishes an accommodation training module applicable for all Indiana assessments. This module is designed to provide schools with an in-depth look at the available accommodations and supports available with each assessment and how to manage and review student accommodation settings in TIDE. Please look for this on-demand training module to become available this fall and reference it as needed throughout the school year. Please contact the Indiana Assessment Help Desk with any questions about this module. The Indiana Assessment Policy Manual and the Accessibility and Accommodations Information for statewide assessment can be accessed from IDOE's webpage, linked on the next slide. Be sure to review each document ahead of testing, as each is applicable to all Indiana assessments, and let IDOE know if you have any questions. Contact information can be found on this slide. Please direct any assessment accommodation questions to the Office of Student Assessment. Resources pertaining to this assessment can also be found on this slide. You can also access these resources on the IDOE assessment webpage. Thank you for watching the AM Assessment Accommodations Overview. Please reach out to the Office of Student Assessment with any questions.